Hi everyone, welcome to the masterclass on the new OFSTED framework. I'm really excited to share some of the key changes and some things that I think are really important for you to consider going forwards. So just without further ado, I'll make a start. A little bit about myself. I think it's important that you understand a little bit about me to see what credibility I'm bringing to my insights. So I've been 20 years in education, working for Harris Federation and Lee Academies Trust across a number of schools. And I think it's relevant for you to know that I've led on SEND and PP. I wasn't a Senko, but I was the SLT that line managed those areas. And I was able to really support the systems leadership on those areas without necessarily being the expert, but enabled students to really thrive. And I worked on a lot of things which were amplified by my inclusive leadership skills and being able to work with toxic teams. With the pupil premium strategy, I worked on this in two different schools. And one of my notable achievements was doing the NTP program, the National Tutoring Program. And it was an achievement because it was almost like one of those initiatives where a lot of money is thrown at schools, but it's really difficult to get the value if you don't have the time or capacity to think about the systems, because often the students that we want to support the most are often finding it quite difficult and challenging in the normal day-to-day school, and their experience isn't always the best. So I had to really carefully engage with parents and the students and find the best way for them to get the tutoring, whether it's bespoke sessions, one-to-one, personal, in person or online, and navigate the best way for them to succeed. And eventually what happened was those that had the tutoring were doing better in English and maths than those that weren't. So that was another success. I was part of a school senior leadership team that got outstanding in 2024. And there was some really good comments about how happy the staff felt and how we worked with the community in order for the students to get the best experience. I'm a fellow at the Chartered College of Teaching, and I work as an ITT diversity coach, helping with the global pipeline with a number of ITT providers. And I'm a fellow at the University of Equity, Diversity and Inclusion. So those are a number of things. And I was working within schools for 20 years, and now I work with schools within my own organization, and I do consulting and coaching on leadership and equity, diversity, inclusion predominantly. I also coach with Leadership Edge and Integrity. Leadership Edge is an organization that helps to create coaching cultures within schools. And with Integrity, I coach head teachers and school leaders navigating the day-to-day. And I consult with schools on their EDI work, predominantly starting with leadership, and I do inclusive language and talks as well, amongst other things. And I present at other conferences, and I've put some of those up there as well. So let's get into the OFSTED framework. There are three main pillars that underpin the way that inspectors are expected to examine the experience of students in schools. So the first one is about achievement, and are students achieving academically and personally as well? Do they feel like they belong and feel valued as part of the school community so that they attend, behave, and contribute positively? And do they thrive ultimately with the right systems and oversight to be safe and flourish? So I think it's quite key that in order for people to thrive, it's the systems that are enabling that to happen. And it's not just by chance based on the individual. And I thought it would be good just to reflect on Maslow's hierarchy in the sense of, where does achieve, belong, and thrive fit in? Well, actually, although OFSTED frame achievement as the first thing, belonging does come at the bottom layer, the first lower layer in Maslow's hierarchy before achievement and thriving. And I think it's worth recognizing that if people feel social and connection and acceptance it's then that they're able to achieve, because they've got the confidence and the self-esteem to be able to do that before they're able to realize their full potential and thrive. So if there was something that I was going to change, was probably the way in which belonging and achievement are positioned and framed. So I'm going to go through some of the strands and talk about the key things that stood out for me and how I feel you can enact that as leaders and educators in your school. So the first strand is about inclusion, and it's worth noting that inclusion has a criteria and a measure on its own right, which is really positive, which puts it up there against safeguarding, because often inclusion previously is thought of students with SEND historically, but now inclusion means so much more in terms of equity and diversity as well. So what the guidance says, so this is lifted straight from the guidance, that it covers pupils under pupil premium SEND, social care, plus those facing other barriers, which may include pupils who share a protected characteristic. So this is running through each strand. They mention this group of students time and time again. They're more explicit about saying protected characteristics within this strand, but actually within the others, they sort of put it under an umbrella of well-being. But it's worth noting that it's not just students with PP and SEND. And leaders' decisions must be underpinned by well-analysed quantitative and qualitative data. And leaders should build a culture where staff understand barriers, including those specific to their community context, which often leaders are aware of. But I think it's important that there is relevant quantitative and qualitative data to support your thinking. So what it is, I think it's important for people, when especially it comes to protected characteristics, that leaders are thinking about discrimination and protected characteristics through the lens of both interpersonal incidents, but also systemically about how we can compound disadvantage or support celebration and powerful narratives as well. Dialogue that's rooted in skillful curiosity that breaks silence, because often when we think about the groups that I spoke about in terms of inclusion, it's difficult to have conversations, frank conversations about these things, because we're scared of saying the wrong thing. We don't really want to offend, or we don't have the lived experience. So it's important that there are ways and mechanisms that we've got that skillful curiosity and breaks the silence. There's intentional education on context-based issues, including protected characteristics and mental health. There are clear systems where staff and pupils feel safe to speak up. And I've worked in schools where there are systems in place, but students and staff feel much more confident speaking to external visitors than they do with their own internal staff. So what it's not is data viewed only through a majority-led lens. So we understand the emphasis of having that data, quantitative and qualitative, but there is a risk of thinking that we're okay when we look at the data and see that 85–90% people strongly agree that they feel happy and safe. And then we stop and we don't examine what the other 10% think. So it's important that we do look at those 10%, because often people that are marginalized are in the minority in numbers. A purely sanctions-based approach to discrimination and protected characteristics. So yes, there are red lines about what we accept and don't accept. However, in the society that we live today, there are so many outside influences that are shaping the way that young people are thinking, that if we don't allow them the safety to be able to open up a dialogue and think about these things in safe environments and think about things that are both positive and negative, then we're not giving them the space to be able to create a better narrative. Leaders reacting to incidents instead of proactively building cultures of safety and belonging, which is not just down to policy, it's about how we also show up on a day-to-day basis. Second strand, curriculum and teaching. So the guidance is asking us to draw on explicitly on the best available evidence, including high quality research, supporting all those students within those groups that I mentioned earlier. And the curriculum must equip pupils with the knowledge and cultural capital to thrive in later life. And I think it's not just about them thriving academically, but also socially. Leaders ensure pupils build strong foundations for academic achievement, health, and well-being. And it's about people understanding that well-being is not just about how they're feeling, good and bad on a particular day. Their identity and their influences is also shaping their experience of well-being as well. Curriculum designs and decisions are refined over time using evidence and insight from inside and outside the school. So we need good mechanisms where we're gathering those voices both inside and outside with community stakeholders, parents, carers, as well, in order to gather that voice and manage that in a way so that we can have impact in the curriculum and teaching. And I thought it'd be relevant to share what some of the research is saying. 30% of teachers say the curriculum does not reflect their pupils. 30% feel SEND and disadvantaged pupils are underrepresented. 50% the same about LGBTQ plus and non-binary students. And 82% of pupils don't recall reading a text from a global majority writer. So these are like national statistics taken from a couple of years ago, but it'd be good to get curious about thinking about similar things within your own settings. So what it is, powerful and authentic representation of diversity, teaching that reflects the society pupils are living in today. And when I was looking at some research about attendance and why students are not attending school, they often feel one of the reasons is that they feel like the curriculum and school does not reflect the world that they're living in today. So they're not given an opportunity to really explore that in the way they wish to. And I guess that's just one perspective, but it's interesting to think about that, consider that. A dialogue that makes students feel safe to share ideas, intentional actions from leaders on reducing systemic inequities, both inside and outside of school, recognizing where they exist. So what it's not, deficit thinking attached to certain groups. With all the best intentions, we're here to serve all the kids and get them to meet their potential, achieve their very best. But often there can be deficit thinking around certain aspects of identity, whether students have special educational needs, which limits their potential. And that can show up through the language that we use, the opportunities that they have. But if we don't recognize that, deficit thinking can take place, it's harder to interrupt it. Curriculum design without student perspective. So, us taking the power away from students to be able to contribute to a curriculum that they have helped to co-create. Unintentionally reinforcing stereotypes by having narratives of not powerful and authentic representation of diversity, a Eurocentric lens on knowledge and cultural capital. So it's about expanding people's social capital and thinking about diverse perspectives on various things that have happened in history or the books that they read, or some of the best researchers and scientists that they hear about, so that they can see that all of these things are available across the world and not just through a Eurocentric lens. Third one, attendance and behaviour. So the guidance says that the leaders must know and understand their pupils and the influences on them given the school's context. Pupils should attend well, including the groups that we mentioned at the beginning. And if their attendance is low, it should be improving towards national averages. Leaders and staff pay close attention to the needs of specific groups, so they attend regularly and on time. And I think it's important for leaders to be able to do that. They need to gather the data and information, both qualitative and quantitative. But like I said at the beginning, there needs to be that safety that people can speak about those things candidly. Leaders and staff need to create a positive environment where bullying, discrimination, harassment, including sexual harassment, victimization, violence, and derogatory language are not tolerated. And leaders recognize that bullying can take many forms, often motivated by prejudice against race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender reassignment, SEND, care status, adoption care status, caring responsibilities, and they may be based on actual perceived differences as well. So what it is really getting under the skin of what young people feel and need to belong. And it's about building connection and trust over compliance. So putting the emphasis of finding out why and what's going on. Staff really equipped to talk about discrimination, intersectionality, and allyship and what that looks like. Because often staff want to do the right thing, but they just don't know how to approach it. A real culture of skillful curiosity and dialogue about different forms of bullying and discrimination, giving people the space to talk about it in safe spaces. Leadership with a clear understanding of how all their students feel examined through a contextual lens and across groups, and a range of groups that are not just, just about the ones that are we often look at. It's about expanding those groups that are contextual to our communities. So what it's not, a purely a sanctions-based approach to bullying, discrimination, or attendance. Only a few staff confident to talk about discrimination and EDI, which is often what happens in schools. Like you'll go to the person that will be able to talk to the parent about the racist complaint. You'll go to the person who will be able to speak to the member of staff that's made a homophobic comment. You'll go to the member of staff that will be able to talk about the microaggression, about mothers taking maternity leave. So it's about making sure that everyone feels equipped to have those conversations, and a culture where students and staff fear repercussions for speaking up. And this is often, if you are from a marginalized group or disadvantaged group, then you are more likely to assess the risk of speaking up, and looking at some of the research from Dr. Nick Ponsford. I was looking at it a couple of days ago. Students that are white to white presenting feel much more confident in the policies and systems to talk about feeling unsafe or if something's wrong compared to those that are global majority. So recognizing that as leaders and making sure that there's safety for people to know that there's not going to be repercussions for speaking up. And that could be, the unintended consequences could be the way that a leader or a person responds to that complaint, or they might feel like it's a lack of opportunity further down the line, so it's not worth the risk. So what it's not, an approach based on fixing pupils rather than understanding them. So yes, we do want them to attend more and do better, feel happy and safe, but it's not about fixing them and getting them to comply on what we think success is. It's more about understanding them and thinking about what's going to work best for them to move forwards. Fourth one, personal development and well-being. So people should become responsible, respectful, and active citizens who contribute positively to society. Leaders must promote equality of opportunity, ensuring all pupils thrive together, and understand that individual characteristics make people unique. People should be willing to participate in artistic, musical, sporting, and cultural opportunities. People should develop their ability to recognize from right from wrong, offering reasoned views on moral and ethical issues. Leaders and staff should know their pupils and be vigilant in identifying those who need additional pastoral support. People should feel welcome, valued, respected, and that they belong. And they should develop a range of social skills in different contexts. Working and socializing with peers from different religious, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds. So this is lifted straight from the guidance. And I think given the events that have been happening across the world and on our streets in London over the weekend, I think it just highlights how important it is that we pay attention and support our young people to do all of these things really, really well in such difficult times. And we know how important it is that they are, we are developing them to be responsible, respectful, and active citizens who contribute positively to society. So what it is, in order to do this well, you need psychological safety in classrooms so students can speak openly about their sense of belonging. Whether they agree, disagree, they need to learn to respect each other, even when they have opposing views. Staff skilled in having these conversations with curiosity, because often staff will feel like they're not sure what they're supposed to say and feel nervous around that because often there isn't a training about how we handle these conversations. A curriculum designed with contextual information about communities in mind. So if things are coming up in the community, then it's important that there's opportunities to address those within the curriculum. Leaders who are aware of the experiences of different groups and individuals, not limited to protected characteristics. So, who's from different socioeconomic backgrounds, single parent families, who's neurodivergent. I don't know if we record all of these things or allow people to self-identify as well, because there is a problem with the way that we group people to be pupil premium, because not always, people don't always identify themselves as being eligible for free school meals. So it's really important that we gather the accurate data as well. So what it's not, sorry, that's sort of skipped. Let's see. Oops, I need to skip twice. So trips and experiences framed only through a Eurocentric view of cultural capital. So do your young people visit a church? Do they have the same opportunity to go to a mosque, a synagogue, a gurdwara, a Hindu temple? Thinking about those things, when do young people have the opportunity to experience those sorts of things? Ignoring deficit thinking when shaping opportunities. So really thinking about how deficit thinking might be shaping our opportunities and the curriculum. Treating personal development as separate from the main curriculum. So really the approach should be similar and woven into the main curriculum as well. Only personal development teachers skilled to have conversations about difficult topics, and that happens when all staff aren't expected to deliver these sorts of lessons. Some schools have just a small group of teachers. So that means that other teachers don't necessarily get the training or skills to be able to have these conversations. A tick box list of activities or assemblies that are disconnected from the wider curriculum. So it's really important that those assemblies and the wider the activities or celebration days that you're considering are woven into the curriculum. It doesn't feel like it's tokenistic. Number 5, leadership and governance. So leaders and governors need to ensure the school's provision enables every pupil to thrive. Leadership should be reflective, understanding the school's strengths and areas for development and taking effective action with the community to improve or sustain higher standards. So 2 things here that I noticed. Being reflective requires us to recognize when we're looking at some of that data and information and sometimes being a bit defensive or deciding that something's good for the community when we haven't necessarily engaged with the community as well. So it's really important that we create the space to be really reflective and not always look through a majority-led lens on the information that we're looking at. And it's a taking effective action with the community. So what channels and routes are there for the community to engage in policies, curriculum, their voice? How is that being gathered? Parents in the wider community should be engaged thoughtfully and positively to support pupils' education. So, I know that some of the parents that we want to reach in schools, we find it difficult for them to participate in a way that other parents do. So that's why the thoughtful and the positive support, thoughtful approach and with an outcome of positivity influencing their decisions is really important. The responsible body should consider the workload and well-being of leaders, who in turn should prioritize the workload and well-being of staff. And I think if you look at workload and well-being without considering identity, you'll have blind spots. It's worth looking at that intersectionally and seeing what's coming up for different groups, so that you can then, your solutions can be better and you can be curious with the right people. Leaders should establish and sustain a culture where people's experience a positive and enriching school life and where respectful relationships are the norm. And I think sometimes there's a lot of banter amongst students and the lines of respect are blurred. And it's important that they have an understanding that even though they feel like they're not causing harm and the other person doesn't feel harmed either, it does contribute to the compounding of discrimination and deficit thinking of one group being less than another. Governance should really hold leaders to account for their provision for their students in their different groups. And leaders and governors should develop constructive relationships with all parents and the wider community, building trust that enables pupils to achieve and to feel like they belong. So the only way I think that this can happen really truly is if leaders and governors are trained in leading equity, diversity, and inclusion. Leaders who understand deficit ideology and reframe hard to reach communities as yet to be reached. Safeguarding that incorporates as a minimum anti-racist practice. Schools setting the tone with external agencies and communities in their positioning on EDI work. What it's not. A mindset of trying to fix communities rather than working with them. Leadership dictating what is needed without engaging with their communities. Talking about equality instead of equity. So equality is saying, well, we've given everyone the opportunity to attend this parents' meeting and they just decided not to turn up. Or we've advertised this job and, it's not our fault that people from the global majority are not applying for these roles. Shifting from that thinking to thinking, well, actually, what could be the hidden barriers that are stopping people from applying or engaging with us? What are the hidden messages that we are giving that means that people feel like they are not able to contribute or engage with us? Policies written on paper but not enacted through inclusive leadership behaviour. So you could have an anti-racist policy or a family-friendly policy about people thinking about extending their families, but leadership behaviours are not really inviting diverse perspectives or creating the conditions for people to speak up about their experiences. So it's really important that the policies are being enacted. Last one I'm going to talk about is safeguarding, and that has a criteria of either being met or not met. And it's about establishing a culture in which staff, pupils, and parents feel comfortable raising and discussing concerns that relate to safeguarding pupils and feel confident that appropriate action will be taken when necessary. And this is, paramount to the safety of all individuals. And I think if leaders are lacking in knowledge in their equity, diversity, and inclusion leadership responsibilities, then they will have blind spots when they're dealing with safeguarding. And the worst thing is that individuals are carrying the weight and not sharing in what their experiences are. And like I said before, talking to external people rather than being able to share with a member of staff within the school safely. And ultimately, we don't want any harm to be caused to people. So I think it's really important for people to think about that in terms of a safeguarding perspective. And the new grading goes from urgent improvement to exceptional. So urgent improvements is like special measures. Needs attention is where barriers are unassessed and duties are unmet. Expected standards, the needs are identified, the support's in place, and barriers are being reduced. So you're evidencing that barriers are being reduced through qualitative and quantitative data. A stronger standard is where decisions is based on data, voice, and intersectional analysis. So you're looking at aspects of the school, how it's running, and you're layering it by different groups and demographics. So you're gaining a deeper understanding of what needs to be done next. Exceptional is you're having transformational impact for all students. Intersectional gaps are being closed, practices are being shared, and there's an inclusive culture. So you can see that actually data is really underpinning, qualitative and quantitative data is really underpinning the decisions and the strands of the framework, and inclusion is really coming into each part of the framework. But here are some of the issues with data and gathering that data. There's a real fear of speaking up, and sometimes there are hidden voices that we just don't hear about. You know, how do you know how single parent family students are doing? Are people disclosing invisible disabilities in your staffing body? So if there's hidden voices, we don't know what we don't know. Therefore, we're not able to support those people. There's a lack of EDI training, so we don't really understand how it works and how it shows up in systems as well as interpersonally. There's a real fear of getting it wrong, which comes from a place of wanting to get it right and not offend people. There's limitations on data collection, like I said about PP and free school meal data, and the amount of data that we collect and what we do with it. And there's a lack of confidence in actually having some of these conversations, skillful dialogue, once we've got the information of who feels like they belong and who doesn't, and to get skillfully curious. There's we don't really want to say the wrong thing. And I was looking at some research from the Global Equality Collective. Dr. Nick Ponsford did some research based on 26,000 voices of students and staff that work with them in service that they do about their experience of school. And here's some of the findings that they gathered from those 26,000 voices. They found that 21% of students from single parent households report not being happy at school. 33% of neurodivergent students don't feel like they have an adult in their school they can talk to. Only 39% of students feel the curriculum is diverse and represents them. So that means about 60% don't feel that way. 60% of staff feel they can actually be their authentic selves at work, so 40% don't. Staff currently experiencing lower socioeconomic status feel the least comfortable in terms of safety. And 62% of staff report feeling excluded due to their parent carer status or pregnancy status. And I just thought, it's good for you to reflect and think about if you wanted to extract that information from your school and in terms of your community, would you be able to say, like, name the percentage or number of groups that feel happy and safe within your setting? Something to reflect on. And I'd recommend looking at Global Equality Collective about gathering your data. And when we think about data, qualitative and quantitative, which is really underpinning most of the actions that we make in schools, insight without action leads to frustration. So if staff and students are saying things and they feel like you're not acting on them, it leads to frustration. And action without insight leads to inequity. So if we're not asking the right questions, and we've got blind spots in the way that we think that people should be grouped, then we will unintentionally compound disadvantage because we've got hidden voices and we've not asked the right questions to gather that information. So I think those are worth reflecting on. So just a little bit about some of the work that I've done. I worked with one school, and within a year, these are some of the shifts that were made in terms of staff's perception on different things. And you can see significant improvements on things like how well the school responds to social and world events, about having conversations about race, about accessing appropriate training and learning opportunities in EDI work, about reporting any discrimination around menopause. So you can see the percentage has shifted remarkably. And like, this is before the new framework came out. This was just like, as a school, we realized that we needed to do more work because we had that problem that students were telling external visitors about the racist incidents, the homophobic incidents. Although we felt like we were dealing with them, they still felt enough unhappiness around that they were sharing with other people. And I think that was the penny drop, that students don't necessarily feel safe enough, that we need to do some work. So we did some work, and these are some of the changes. And how did those changes come about? There were two things that we did. The first one was that I worked with the senior leaders and delivered training on EDI after I'd done the training myself. And then we, implemented a lot of changes, and some of those changes, most of those changes came through the remits within each SLT member, so that we were getting better equity, diversity, inclusion work within our remits. And then we also created systems where people could really manage the discomfort of talking about some of these different aspects of identity that we don't necessarily relate to because we don't have the lived experience. So that's when this framework came in, called the Take Action, which is a framework that, where I work with schools, will they use for restorative justice conversations, when they do deliver the personal development curriculum, when they're delivering assemblies, when we ask staff to deal with microaggressions or difficult conversations. We ask them to introspect first, following this framework, about thinking about what our own reality is first, and our own narratives, honoring our emotions, interrupting old ways and opening up to new ways of thinking, and notice the impact on others, but also developing the inclusive leadership behaviors of the senior team. So they have a clear understanding of what effective sponsorship and mentoring is, how to build open and effective communication so that you're hearing the insights of different people, that you're allowing risk and embracing failure so that people don't feel the risk of sharing things that they feel like traditionally they'd get repercussions for. You're building a strong feedback culture, which is not isolated to hierarchy, and you're building diverse networks so that you're gathering insights from people. And by doing so, I support members to be able to deal with a parental complaint about a racist incident. Think about sponsorship and mentoring when one of your staff is part-time and high caring needs, hugely capable, but hasn't applied for an advertised promotion. Thinking about how you're going to respond to those sorts of situations. And I've put a few across on the screen, but it's about using your inclusive leadership skills to be better at dealing with the day-to-day within school, so that the leaders are showing up in a way so that you're building trust and confidence. You're being skillfully curious. You're creating a dialogue where people are breaking the silence and feel safe enough to say what they think, and you feel equipped to be able to respond well. So I'm just going to finish up about different ways that, if you'd like to continue to work with me, these are the things that I do. So I do expert EDI coaching. I'm qualified as a coach. I allow people to reflect without shame or blame, redistribute power, not just perform allyship, and know what's yours to hold and what's systemic. And I talk about it from perspective of both sides, being a senior leader, enacting some of these policies, which can be quite harmful, feeling absolutely appalled once I realized it, once I'd learned about it, but also being on the receiving end of discrimination as well. So I bring that knowledge, as well as my EDI fellowship and EMCC qualification in coaching. I also do expert workshop facilitation to get unstuck. So I help people solve the right problems, not just go in circles, create connection, not compliance, and challenge without fear or blame, and make sure the same voices aren't dominating, and you get a solution. Whether it's EDI work or something else, another strategy, you will end up with a solution that has heard everyone's voices, but found the best solution for the problem, the right problem, which is often the most frustrating thing is when you have a meeting about something and you're going around in circles, and then you end up having another meeting about the same thing. It doesn't ever end, and it's a waste of everyone's time. So I do work on that. I'm a facilitator as well, qualified facilitator. And I do an inclusive leadership program called Walk the Talk EDI. And it's a shift to strategic leadership with collective responsibility. So individuals aren't carrying the weight on its own. It's a culture shift. You're building inclusive cultures, not just closing the knowledge gap. So yes, we'll learn about protected characteristics, but it's not just about that. It's about our leadership, inclusive behaviors as well, and tools to turn difficult moments into skillful dialogue and action. So practical things that you can use in the moment in order to build that culture as well. Because it's important in the sense of belonging and happiness for staff, and actually for people to feel included and give their voice and participation as well, but also for organizations to thrive. It's really important. And yes, all of this is important for Ofsted, but ultimately most of us didn't sign up to work in schools to get the best Ofsted rating. It was to make a difference. And I think the work that I do is about helping leaders get to that ambition. So here are just some testimonials from people that I've worked with. So I'll give you a minute to read those. And then finally, if you'd like to book a call with me, scan the QR code or email me. Happy to have a half an hour chat with you to talk about your context, whether you need more support from me, but I'm happy to give you advice in that half an hour of what I think you should do next in terms of delivering your next steps in your strategy in your work. So feel free to reach out, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for listening.